It is official. I have quit my job in TV news. Driving into the garage for my last day on air.
Our King 5 environmental specialist, Allison Morrow, joining us now on set for what's going to be the last time tonight.
I know, I can't believe it. Hey everybody, Allison Morrow here. If you're new to the channel, I am sitting in the Airstream that my husband and I are renovating. We bought it about a year ago. We have finished gutting it and we're about to start the rebuild. We're gonna live in this as we move off-grid-ish, is what we say. We wanna buy like 100 acres, build a family homestead, have some animals, maybe some chickens, a vegetable garden, a couple kids maybe. And we wanna live in this while we do that. But in the meantime, I have basically arrived at the biggest juncture in my career because I have been living a totally opposite life for my entire young adulthood. And I've been in TV news for almost 2 decades. I've been a reporter for TV news for 12 years. I've been covering the environment, specifically in the Pacific Northwest, for 5 years. And it's all technology, really fast, racing clocks, adrenaline pumping, and I am basically taking the opposite direction and moving towards a life where you're watching squash grow out of the ground. Now, before we get to why I made this decision and where I'm headed at this point, I wanted to just take you down memory lane real fast and tell you a little bit about my career up to this point. So I started interning in TV news as a college student, spent every summer in a newsroom, went from Tampa to Washington, D.C., eventually to New York City. I was hired right out of college as a segment producer for Fox News Channel's morning show, Fox and Friends. I met all kinds of people as a producer and as an intern. One of the highlights, Ozzy Osbourne. I actually got to go with Greta Van Susteren for her interview with him at the Ritz-Carlton, which was like the coolest thing ever to watch as a 20-year-old. But probably about 8 months to a year into being a producer in New York City, I just started wondering if TV news was exactly the right career for me. And I kind of had the bug to go back to grad school because at the time I thought maybe what I really wanted to do was be a psychologist. So I went to Boston University. I actually went to seminary. I got a Master of Divinity degree because my plan was to study theology and philosophy and psychology before getting a PhD in psychology. I kind of wanted to study the meaning of life and how people think through the big questions. And in order to graduate, I had to take preaching class. Now, I tried really hard to get out of preaching because I didn't want to be a preacher and I didn't want to work in a church, but Boston University told me I had to take it in order to get my degree. So I begrudgingly took it. I waited till my last semester of my last year, sat in the back of the room, but it was that class that changed my life. Dr. Dale Andrews was my professor at the time, and he told us that we all are storytellers, no matter who we are, whether we're a pastor or not a pastor, and that the way we tell stories in our communities either moves them forward or backward, depending on how we frame them. We can either be a voice that gives people good information to build relationships and connections, or we can give information framed in a way that's negative and divisive and tears people and communities apart. For some reason, a light bulb went off in my head and I realized that nobody had ever connected the bigger picture for why someone would be a journalist. And to me, that made a lot of sense. And so for some reason, I thought, you know, I never tried being a reporter. I didn't really want to be on camera, but maybe I would give it a go. And for a year or two, just give it a shot and see if I liked it. Well, of course, now 12 years later, here I am sitting in this Airstream and it has been a wild ride. I've done things like cover the Olympics in Rio, where I met Lester Holt. I've covered presidential campaigns like Mitt Romney's. I have flown with turtles to California for rehab. I have seen bears released. I have hiked in the snow to look for wolverine dens. I've flown in seaplanes and landed in jellyfish schools. I've flown with the Coast Guard to bust crab poachers. I've ridden on horses for cattle drives to track wolf recovery. I've stood down bulls with the biggest horns I've ever seen. I've worn overalls to the governor's press conference. I have literally watched mountain goats fly. I've had a front row seat to history and I'm really grateful for the time that I have had. However, I decided over the last couple of years that the clock racing, adrenaline pumping, world just wasn't for me. And here's how I arrived at this decision. Now, just to give you a brief look at a day in a life of what I did, I would have editorial meetings around 9:30 in the morning. We'd get our final okay around that time, and I was off to the races. I basically had from 10 a.m. until about 2 p.m. to drive to my interviews. Some may be 2 hours away, shoot the interviews, you have to shoot all the video, and then by about 2 p.m. you want to be sitting somewhere with your laptop open so that you can start logging the video, write the story, edit the story, remember you got to voice the story, all of that good stuff. And sometimes you have to have your story on by 4 o'clock. So in total, you have basically 6 hours a day to really play with to get your information not only recorded on video, but edited and written and all that good stuff. And when you're covering simple stuff, like, I don't know, there are plenty of stories out there that may not need a whole lot of time to really understand, but with the environment, it's pretty complex, and there are certain stories that need a lot of time, not just to understand yourself, but you need more time to be able to present it to the viewers. One of the things that's happening in television news right now to keep people's attention is shorter stories. You may be noticing that watching the news at home. Usually the conventional time limit is about 90 seconds per story. Well, I got to the point where I was realizing, you know, a lot of these stories need way more than 90 seconds for people to really understand what's going on here, especially the people who want to understand it. And that's when I started getting more and more into YouTube, because I realized that for YouTube on my channel, I can go as long as I want. I can talk for hours if I want to. The only risk is that you'll just stop watching, but I don't have a boss telling me that I have to cut my story down. Plus, I did all of my own shooting and editing. A lot of people don't know that reporters nowadays often serve as their own photographers. So you shoot the story, you edit the story, you have to write it and do everything a reporter would do, but you lose half the time because you also have to be the photographer, which means less time for researching and really understanding what you're talking about. The second reason is that I want a lifestyle that is slower. Like I said, I've been watching the second hand of clocks racing for the last 12 years. I don't understand people who have jobs where they look at clocks and are like, when is my day going to be over? Because I've never had that experience. I always watch clocks, ripping my hair out, wishing that I had more time. It goes by so fast. I didn't want that life anymore. I wanted one where I could slow down and watch my vegetable garden and the things that I outsource to other people so that I can work really hard. I want to start doing those things myself, like feeding myself a little bit, maybe sometimes making my own clothes or my own soap, I don't know. And so those two combined, wanting to just be able to have more time to really delve into the issues that I cover and have longer conversations with people about what you should know if you're interested in protecting our natural resources, combined with wanting a lifestyle that allows me more time to just slow down and literally smell roses. I wanted to make a big leap into a life that basically brings those two together, and that's where this Airstream comes into play. And then another thing is that public distrust of mainstream media is pretty high right now, and I don't blame people who are skeptical of mainstream media. I think in a lot of ways we've earned that skepticism and that criticism. And I think the only way to gain it back is to start building relationships of transparency and getting it right, obviously. But that's another thing that I wanted to do with this YouTube channel, is to be able to say, okay, I want to regain the public's trust. I want to show you all sides of these really important issues, and I want to give you a little bit of a look into my life and how I got there, in hopes that even if you disagree with what's going on, or you disagree even sometimes with my opinion when I share it, you'll at least respect how I got there, and you'll trust that I was honest with you. And really, when it comes to conservation, environmental protection, trying to conserve the natural resources around us and live with nature, not against it, each one of us really has to do our part. That's the biggest lesson I've learned over the last 5 years of covering environmental issues, is that each one of us has to do something and stop waiting for the government or for corporations to change things for us. In fact, when it comes to business and technology and the market moving in a direction that is more environmentally friendly, we consumers play the biggest part in moving them in that direction. And so who am I to tell people what we should be doing if I don't live the message myself? So this is also like me putting my money where my mouth is and saying that, all right, not everybody can move off grid in an Airstream, but maybe this can serve as an example and encouragement and maybe inspiration to people to do something. You don't have to be like us, but you can carve out a little piece of wild, sustainable living, even if you're still in a city. And I really do hope that this channel encourages people, and actually specifically women like myself who have been focused on a career most of their life, to sit back and just evaluate and see, what do I really want to do? You know, my mom, when I was a little kid, used to talk a lot about how as a doctor, she felt like she had missed out on a lot of life, that she grew up in the feminist movement of the 70s, and she felt like she had to be a high-powered career woman and also have kids and do it all, and that in some ways she felt like she didn't do stuff that she really wished she had because she was focused on performing for the modern world and what people think a woman should be. So this is me also kind of reevaluating, like, what kind of woman do I want to be? I've been focused on career and education and all of these things that, you know, this sort of successful woman of the 21st century is supposed to. And maybe now I want to be a mom, or I want to raise a vegetable garden, or I want to ride my horse on the trails, or I want to learn how to use a chainsaw or something. I mean, what's wrong with that? I really think that a lot of what we've put our trust in this world to make us happy is obviously failing us. We have problems with mental health that make it in the news every single day, and we're missing something. What we're doing is kind of a social experiment, I guess you could say. We're sort of banking on the idea that when you have real relationships with real people and real relationships with yourself and the land around you, that you learn a bit of responsibility that brings meaning and purpose that in some cases we've lost. The nihilism and just the sense of purposelessness that I often found when I was out reporting or even just talking to people in today's world, I think that a lot of that, if not a good portion of it, comes from the fact that we have lost our very basic relationships. Basically, my theory is that like 150 years ago, we used to have relationships based on an economy of goods because we had to know the baker, we had to know the guy who raised our vegetables or the woman who raised our dairy or our cows or made our clothes, because there was no such thing as Amazon. You didn't order clothes from around the world. You knew where they all came from because you had to. And I think, unfortunately, knowing people only through the computer, through social media, it has helped us, in not a good way, boil people down to belief systems, or in my world, sound bites, instead of actions, because we don't know people or see them actively living out their life, and we only know that one thing they posted about a certain political viewpoint on Facebook, and we just start to reduce people down to these overly simplistic ideologies, which then hurts our ability to have civil discourse with people, to have relationships. So what's next? Well, I am going to be shooting videos for the Department of Natural Resources, basically out in the wild like I have been for the last several years, talking about forest health and fish health. But I'm also getting to launch my own media company on the side, AllisonMorrowMedia.com. And I'm really excited about that because I'm planning to not only offer video production work for conservation groups or any other business that's just trying to grow its own audience and be its own newsroom, but also offer trainings to help people, scientists or conservationists, nonprofits, people who do all kinds of really cool work that I've been interviewing over the last several years. I want to give them the opportunity to learn how to tell their own stories, to be more engaging for interviews for audiences, and to grow their own brands. So we're actually moving the Airstream and ourselves to Central Washington. We have a couple weeks to get there, but we've had to do some reworking of our plans on the Airstream and our timelines, of course, with it. It's definitely set us back. We have a couple of videos coming up of things we actually had to unscrew and take apart that we had worked really hard putting together for the Airstream rebuild, because we just have to take all of the wood with us now, and it wasn't going to fit into the trailer that we got for moving unless we just pulled all of it apart. Anyway, this has been a long video. I'm glad you stuck with me if you have up to this point. I really appreciate the support and the encouragement that many people have already given us as we make this move. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell icon so that you get notifications when I upload a new video. And I hope you come along for the journey. I'm really excited. We have a lot more to announce about what's next for us and where we're headed. But for now, I just want to say I'm really grateful for the community that we've already started to build on YouTube, and the community that I know we're going to continue to build. I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a comment. Have you ever made big transitions in your life and your career? What were things that you wish you'd done differently? What would you do all over again? I want to hear it all. And I'll see you next time.